Welcome back, viewers and listeners, to my show, The Idiot. Today, I will be talking about one of the most interesting books and philosophy I have ever encountered. If you had some idea of where this podcast was heading towards, based on my previous episodes, you would have guessed that today we'll be talking about the book that was probably written by the writer Albert Camus. And if you had guessed that correctly, well, kudos for you. Today, I will be talking about The Stranger by Albert Camus. When talking about a book like The Stranger, many people directly jump into the philosophical points brought up by the book and just keep rambling about that. They forget that it's an actual book having a story. I mean, if Camus really wanted to write about absurdism in detail, to express every single thought of and the philosophy behind that, he could have just written the myth of Sisyphus and end with that, but he decided to also write books of fiction, including but not limited to The Stranger and The Fall. But he also wrote other books of fiction. If you'd like, you could read them. Why did he deliberately choose to also write literature along with the books of philosophy that he does? Right. Well, for anyone asking such a question, it should come to no surprise that the best way to learn such concepts of philosophy is probably through stories. Yes, philosophy is great, but it is an incredibly tedious task which requires an unending amount of rereading and patience just to understand a small piece of information. When reading books, it is a lot more relatable to the general audience as it is done in a form of a story. All those complex emotions and thoughts are put forward by the characters' thoughts and actions. This is what makes fiction and literature far outweigh in importance and value than any self-help book can ever do. Self-help books are far worse than any philosophical book, by the way, in that regard, actually. They just spit out daily mundane tasks that work for one individual and expect it to work for almost everybody, you know. There is little to no room of explanation being provided as to why those thoughts, why those actions are actually working. And not only is that not being provided, they don't even give the thought process behind those very things, you know. And once you go into that line of thought as to the expressions, as to the thoughts and the feelings that the person underwent through doing those very tasks that brought them success, you'll realize that when they're explaining that, there are quite a few disturbing and paradoxical attitudes that are hence being put forward, and which will also be seen by the individual as he is talking about it. But we do not want to talk about such things in society, those things that showcase how badly success can also influence an individual. It's not only the good things that are always brought forward when some good things actually come forward for an individual. It's a multitude of things. How I see it is, an individual does some form of action, and that action is met with some form of consequences. And those consequences can be seen as both a mixture of good and bad. But we try to always fixate on the bad, or we try to always fixate on the good, or a certain group of people would fixate on the good and fixate on the bad. And that's the whole joke and the whole point of self-help books. They do not want you to see the downsides of it, and that's the whole point of society as well. They don't want you to see the darker side of things, because if they're going to show that to you, they would not want that individual to perhaps go in the direction in which society wants you to go ahead. But think about it, literature and philosophical books on the other hand, and even take movies for that regard, any piece of art and media for that regard, they are completely different in that sense. Why are they different? Because they show it to you. They showed everything to you up front. And movies, actually more specifically movies in that sense, which do this openly, are heavily criticized because nobody likes things that are sad, that are dark. The movie Fight Club? Fight Club was one of those movies which people hated it when it was released because of the themes that it was showcasing to the wider audience. But as time went on, it gained a cult following. But this is the difference, which what I would call as cinema and entertainment, between art and entertainment. They are not the same thing. I truly believe that. art influences a person, changes how they think, and makes them actually become a better person in general. Whereas entertainment, well, entertainment is just something to satisfy your own ego, to satisfy your own vanity. Well, that does have a place, but if you want to really grow as an individual and see something as and see some value out of it, I genuinely believe that it should be things that question your own very self, that question your own very set of beliefs, or at least makes you see something that you might have not seen before. Now, let's forget about all of that. Now, let's talk about the book The Stranger for once. When I had first read this book, I honestly found it very boring and felt, why is this book given so much attention? Why is Camus so celebrated and even compared to someone like Dostoevsky? Incidentally, the more I kept thinking about it, and the more I kept thinking about it, certain elements of the book started resurfacing my memory as I was reading it, as I had read it earlier. Gradually, my opinion of the book started to shift from some ordinary, plain, simple book to something that is far more interesting and having something of some value. One such thing is the intrinsic meaning of purpose. Human beings constantly accumulate knowledge with the belief that attaining them can remove the pain and misery that we are in. In this world where we are constantly sharpening our perception of our surroundings, I often wonder what will man do once he has learned everything. The concept of trying to solve something impossible and even getting answers along the way is something very rewarding. But when you have reached the goal and the destination, what will you do? So, so then what we do from there on in is that we create new problems. And by creating new problems, we go through this unending cycle of again fixating on those new problems, putting ourselves to suffering and finding meaning through that suffering, constantly saying, the next time I do this, I will get success. The next time I'll do this, I'll get success. But once you get success again, you'll again try to find a new problem. And it's almost as if, to put it very plainly, man is in love with suffering, despite every moment of him wanting to go and run away from it. Because if he doesn't suffer, there is nothing for him to do. And if there is nothing for him to do, he will just sit idle all day. And if he just sits idle all day, he'll get bored. And in order to prevent him from getting bored, he fixates on some form of activity. And that form of activity can only bring him some form of pleasure if he has some form of pain while getting and attaining that pleasure in the end. Paradoxes like this that I have brought up earlier were things that were brought up in the book like The Stranger. You see, the main character, Morceau, found that life had no purpose and value, as it would yield in the same end, that is death. Death is something that will always be there no matter what path you take. So the lad always chooses the one that is the easiest and requires the least work to do. This is to most people what might seem like of no big deal, especially when it comes down to harming other people. Other than the fact that Morceau accidentally does harm a certain person. In the book later on, Morceau happens to kill a person. It happened by accident. The person he was killed was having a knife and was showing it towards him with the intent of wanting to kill him. Morceau took out a gun for self-protection. Yet what happened was that day it was very bright and it was very sunny. This led to the knife reflecting some of the sun's rays into Morceau's eyes. This caused Morceau to accidentally shoot the person. Now the person fell onto the floor. Now think about it. As Morceau is a kind of guy who has such a disconnect with human beings because he finds every human to be the same person, right? I mean, just because you're from a different family, you're from a different mother, you're from a different father, I'm from a different mother, I'm from a different father, but we all share the same destination and faith. No matter what path we take, the only way for him to confirm that this person that he's seeing is actually dead was by actually killing him again. He shoots him again just to see, wait, I'm not sure if I've actually killed this guy. Now, let me actually walk you down through this. Now, this is just my interpretation of it, and this is not actually stated by Camus in his book. But when I read this and as I was thinking about it and reflecting why the hell this book is so good, it actually came down to me as this could possibly be one of the possibilities as to something Camus might have tried to bring forward. So let me just put it forward here. So what happened was that Meursault was a very ordinary guy, right? And if Meursault is a very ordinary guy working just as a laborer in a factory and getting minimum wage job and a salary that is decent, which is tough, but yeah, how rare would it be for such an individual to encounter a situation where he sees someone being murdered? Very rare. And on top of that, how rare would it be that that same person who saw that person being murdered was also the murderer himself? Okay, so you're saying that the chances of something like that to happen were so low. So the only way for someone like Meursault, who has such a disconnect with human beings, who finds everyone to be the same, he thinks, well, okay, well, nothing stops me from confirming that the affirmation to my belief that this person is actually dead is that if I shoot him, there will be more blood bleeding out through his body, which is a fair assumption to make, right? Because he feels that if that person is not bleeding more by shooting him again, then this should be some form of imaginative belief, some form of dream, something that he might have cooked up in his head, or some form of simulation, whatever, But think about it. If you're not someone like Meursault, who constantly overthought everything, who had such a huge disconnect with the situation, what would your go-to option be? To see, wait, I have shot a person, and this is not something that happens to me on a very regular and a daily basis. How do I confirm that this person is actually dead? How do I confirm that this event that happened to me is real? Think about it. I mean, his intent to confirm that this thing that he's living in was real was because this is all something that is so unreal to him, right? But what would I do as a normal human being so that I would get a confirmation that I am actually in the living world? So Meursault's attempt to shoot that person again did not come from the intent to wanting to harm that person or wanting to hate that person. He didn't have any grudges over that. He just did it because that's the only way to confirm and affirm that he's a real person. And not only is he a real person, that this situation that happened is actually something that is real and not something that is imaginative. Look, everything I mentioned about, now again, everything I mentioned about could be like, you could say, like, you can take a finger, you could point your finger, you can stretch a finger and say that this is just my understanding of what Meursault's thoughts could be, but it's not something that was written in the books, and it's not something the character ever actually thought. But you can base that this could possibly be true based on everything else Meursault had experienced earlier in the book. For example, in the very beginning of the book, the book starts off with "Mama died yesterday, or maybe today. I don't know. Got a telegram from the phone. Mama died, funeral tomorrow." I mean, think about it. You had spent your whole time with your mother, and knowing that you have spent your whole time with your mother, you do not even care to know when she died, on whether it was yesterday or whether it was today. And you don't, not only that, you don't even want to remember those things because it's so trivial for you. You don't even understand the importance of a funeral. You're just going there because you have to go. It's an obligation by society, which is again something that is later revealed onto the story, that almost everybody was crying, but Meursault, on the other hand, he was fixated on how hot the funeral was. It's a very hot and sunny day. I'm sweating so much. Yes, there was this person. I don't understand why he was crying so much. Apparently, this person loved my mother while he was in the old age home. But I don't feel that way. Again, his disconnect with society was again brought forward by so many other instances in the book, and I'm basing that on the thing that I brought forward of his inner thoughts and feelings when he killed that person by accident. Now, let's say fine, the murder Meursault committed was definitely accidental, and people do stupid things when they are met with surprises. What would you do when your life is on the line? To explain to the court judge the reasons for the actions you had committed, you would probably beg for forgiveness, or at least have some form of remorse and dissatisfaction for the action you had committed. No, but not for Meursault. Meursault understood that it made no difference if a man died today or 10 years from now. He will still be forgotten. Therefore, he saw no reason for feeling any guilty for killing the person. You might ask, what about that person's family and the people he loved? Morceau could simply respond with this with love. What is that? I mean, how can you feel happy for someone forever? You're happy for them for a moment. So you are just sad about the possibility of the many happy moments you could have missed out now that they are gone. But it could have also played out differently. Why? Well, what if that person who did not die because of me continued to live on, but the experiences that you had from there on in were actually terrible experiences? He actually continued to hit you, abuse you, make fun of you, and you now feel that, man, how I wish that guy was dead. Which is a big thing and a big surprise that Merceau tries to actually bring forward. That actually Albert Camus brings forward when he was talking about the stranger and Albert through Merceau. And what is that thing that he's putting forward? It's the fact that the feeling of missing out on things, the feeling of sadness, regret, and depression all comes down through possibilities, to things that you really don't know about. You don't really know whether that will actually be true. You just think that it will be true. You just think that it could happen, but it did not actually happen, right? You missed out on those things without knowing that those things that in the future would actually play out that way. Well, one can always argue it in several different ways. That I have known that person for so long, and because I know that person for so long, it is quite impossible for him to do an action that he just did, right? Which kind of makes sense, and it is a pretty reasonable critique. But there have also been instances where people do hit people by surprise, even if they were there with that person for a long period of time. So, love to Merceau is something he cannot understand, and it's completely foreign to him, because to Merceau, it is just a temporary period of time. But how can the court, the jury, the lawyers, the judges forgive a person who just doesn't have any stance or opinion of their own, or let alone on anything? Let me reinstate myself here. When the court asked him if he felt guilty, he responded with, I do not know, and gave no real stance on what he feels for his actions. How can a court decide a punishment or action for such an individual? Well, Merceau was sentenced to be executed, but at the time, did I realize that the entire justice system works? But at that time, I then realized that the entire justice system works on people's beliefs and opinions. If you remove that, you will be left baffled on how to judge people, and the whole justice system is now defeated. This made me realize a paradox present in the judicial system in the current day and age. The idea of language existing is the biggest barrier to the individual's thoughts and the individual's explanations. I must say so myself, to the very least. There are times I'm having so much pain in my heart that I'm always stuck in the very idea as to why and how this pain is being met within me. We have invented words in order to describe our ideas. We have invented new words to describe our ideas and our feelings, and by doing so, the other person can get a better idea of what we are trying to say. But we still suffer with the biggest problem, and that biggest problem is, what if the current vocabulary that we have supersedes our thoughts and our ideas and our feelings? So we are constantly reinventing new words, reinventing new things in order to match those two together, right? Two and two together. But then we are met with a new problem. The idea of learning such a language becomes increasingly difficult as it continues to exist. So how can we say a person is guilty or innocent when they have the inability to describe their thoughts well? You might say, well, that's probably why we have lawyers. But the problem doesn't lie there as well. Some can do a better job than others. What is a sure fit way to find if someone is innocent or guilty? Now, this book is definitely a strange one, if you ask me. But it is definitely a good introduction to the themes of the absurd and to the absurd of Camus' philosophy. it is definitely a good beginning when wanting to understand Camus' work, because it helps you see the contradictions of very basic and daily tasks that take place on an everyday regular basis. This definitely lays down a decent groundwork in order to understand more complex books like The Myth of Sisyphus. And probably, I'm assuring you here, like again, from my personal experience, I would not have gone so far and finished the entirety of part one of The Myth of Sisyphus if it wasn't for this book that I had read by Albert Camus. Because quite frankly, The Myth of Sisyphus is one annoying book. I had to read it so many times and read certain sections quite a few many times just to get some decent understanding. But again, as I said, it's because I had some idea of what the absurd is based on who Merceau was, that I kind of got a decent hang of it on how to really explain what the hell was going on, on absurdism. And honestly, it's a great book to read, the Myth of Sisyphus and even absurdism in general. It's a fun philosophy, and yeah, it's an interesting thought to have. More importantly, what this book really helps you understand and gain, that it's not about what's right and what's wrong. They're not categories per se. They work hand in hand with each other, they are simultaneously existing with each other. And because they simultaneously exist with each other, that's what causes certain events to actually take place. And once you start looking at things in that way, you'll start seeing things as paradoxes, and when people ask you questions about like politics, about other sort of questions, and nuances about what it means to be a great leader, you no longer respond with, yeah, I think this guy is that or this person is that, but you actually weigh in the whole thing, saying the fact you respond with telling all the good things and the bad things that can possibly happen, and you will actually overall see a much more richer version of every situation. You become a lot more critical in your thoughts and in your judgments. And I think being a critical thinker is very important in a time where everything is going towards oversimplification. Because if everything is being oversimplified, it's going to be very easy for every individual to also get brainwashed into believing very simple things. And getting brainwashed into and being indoctrinated just because a person is using fancy big words and because they have certain qualifications is something you do not want to fall trapped into. Just because this person got a degree into Stanford University or something else, I don't know, for heaven's sake, does that necessarily mean that that person is actually smart? No. For example, a person who might have gone into a smaller university, if he knows what he is doing and he knows it well, he could probably be just as good as a person from Stanford University or any other university for that matter that is of really high regard. But this is the important thing that such books put forward. It's the idea of thinking critically, and not only thinking critically, but seeing through all these things that are going against each other, but simultaneously, while they're going against each other, managing to see how they are existing at the same time. Not destroying each other, even though when logically speaking they should, but they are still somehow existing through that chaos. And that's what it is, this book. You not only see it in the judicial system, you see it in relationships, you see so many things differently. And some people can go very numb and get depressed over it, but after that point, of depression and finding everything to be one and the same, you'll actually end up being a lot more calmer in general. You wouldn't overreact to many situations. But again, this is just my experience on this, and this is probably why I would genuinely recommend to read a book like The Stranger. It is definitely a very engaging read. And again, once you finish the book, you might again be like someone like me. What the hell was that book all about? That was so boring. There was nothing good about it at all. But again, just trust me on the fact that once you have finished the book, just think about it. Just keep thinking about Merceau, his actions, and what he did. And from there on in, you'll probably see what I'm talking about and why this book is a very good read. Thank you, and see you in the next episode. Bye.